Jesus doesn't change his mind when he hears what little food the disciples have to offer to 5,000 plus people at the evening of a long day in the wilderness. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. What a ridiculously tiny amount of food. But Jesus seems unperturbed and decides that even if realistically everyone present wouldn't get more than a breadcrumb, this scarce meal is worth a blessing. Maybe Jesus sees that this imperfect, insufficient meal has potential. Maybe it deserves the blessing because of its scarcity. Or maybe it is just the ancient Jewish habit of blessing food before consumption. Whatever the reason, the way Jesus acts in the text conveys trust in God and God's abundance. He is not led by a spirit of scarcity. What is there is enough and will serve the purpose. Let me guess. That's enough. It'll do. That's not what any of us would have thought, right? This situation is a veritable nightmare for a host. How often do we give into this scarcity mindset? And I don't mean that as an accusation. I think the scarcity mindset must be something profoundly human that lives deep in us. And it starts to show at an early age. In Germany, we spent a couple of days together with Tillmann's nieces. The youngest one is the same age as my daughter Marietta, 2. There was only one high chair at the table. As soon as either of them realized there was meal preparation going on in the kitchen, they asked to be seated in the high chair to secure their spot at the table before the other noticed, stoically sitting there, waiting sometimes for 30 minutes, just to make sure the other one doesn't take her spot. Jesus challenges us to learn to overcome this scarcity mindset. And we don't need to try to explain the miracle of the feeding to see the message that it carries. God provides abundantly for everyone. We just need to trust. There's even food left over, and that means people ate until they've had enough and there was food left. For the impoverished inhabitants of Galilee, that couldn't have been the case very often, if at all. The story of the feeding also looks forward to the Last Supper. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. Likewise, the night before he was betrayed, while they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." To receive a blessing, you don't have to be wealthy and successful. It's not proof of being special or immaculate. Rather, the act of blessing reminds us of God's initial blessing and approval at the creation. And God saw that it was good. A blessing connects the blessed object or subject with God's realm of wholeness and abundance, a realm that breaks through now and then into our world as a miracle, like the feeding of more than 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Like Jesus doesn't send away the crowds that night in the wilderness, and he shares his Last Supper with tax collectors, doubters, betrayers, and deniers, everyone is invited into our community and to God's table. But it's not only a passive, "You are invited, we keep the church door open, come in" sort of invitation. It requires action. In today's gospel, the disciples become an active part of a miracle for the first time. They tell the crowds to stay and settle down. They hand out the food, and in their active doing, suddenly there's enough for everyone. Some of them might have been very, very doubtful regarding Jesus' trust that the food would feed them all. Some of them might have trusted. But I can only imagine the wonder and euphoria they must have felt collecting the leftovers and being part of that experience. How powerful. We too are urged to be active, and it means to overcome our own scarcity mindset, that what we can do is just a drop in the ocean. It is so much more. It is sharing the gospel, being living proof of God's abundant love and care for this world, and that every recipient is enough. Thinking about the text this week, I kept coming back to the narrative that describes Jesus' disciples as people who gradually understand what he means. As if with his death and resurrection, they get the full story and are now able to flawlessly execute Jesus' testament. They graduate. I doubt it. I think they were disciples throughout their whole lives with all the ups and downs. And just to be sure, I looked up the word again. The Latin discipulus means pupil, learner, and it refers to a person who learns from another. It refers to an active follower of someone or a philosophy. And for some reason, in Ireland, it refers to a wretched, miserable-looking man. Being a disciple is nothing we will bring to perfection. There is no 6-week crash course nor a 12-year in-depth study class that helps us to graduate to a master level. We will always be students of Jesus' message, of God's love, sometimes understanding and feeling connected, sometimes doubting and questioning, sometimes making mistakes, and sometimes acting according to the gospel. It is a fragmentary way of being, a human way of living. But I hope that our trust in God's abundance for everyone increases, excuse me, and that we can reshape the world that is governed by a scarcity mindset, be it about a certain place at the table, the distribution of resources, or the question whose voices are worth hearing. Amen.